everyone and welcome back to this month's Sunday Sew Club. Today we're going to be making a device case. I made one for my laptop and for my iPad, but it can be used for any size device, so if it's a Kindle or anything else that you've got. And you probably also can use it to put like your straighteners in or makeup. It is a really versatile case, but as I say, predominantly it was used for a device case. I've used this stripe material, and I really like using stripe material when I'm doing quilting, as I just think it gives a really nice effect when you are quilting onto a pattern that's already there. But you don't need to use stripe material, you can use plain, and it comes together so quickly and so simply. The only time consuming part of it is doing the quilting. So the smaller the case, the smaller the device, the quicker it is, but you can definitely do it in under a couple of hours either way, even if you're doing a large case. This one is for the iPad and it just has a little tie here, and then it just slides in and out. It comes together, as I say, really quickly. Once you've done the quilting, it's really simple to put together. It is just a few seams. And it can be used as a gift for someone or just to protect your devices or store things. But as I say, it's a really quick and easy make. And I used about just over ½ metre of fabric. And yeah, turned out perfectly. So let's get into today's tutorial. Okay, so for today's project, we're going to need our main fabric. I'm just using a cotton poplin, some wadding, and then we're just going to need our basic sewing machine, scissors, ruler, some tailor's chalk just to mark on, and then whatever device you're using. So today's tutorial is going to be a case for my laptop, but you can use the exact same method that we're going to do today for any flat electronic device. So it's the same for an iPad, a Kindle, anything. Just follow the same method and you will get the same end goal. Okay, so we're going to start by getting our fabric. I'm using this striped one, so when I'm doing the quilting today, I am going to use these stripes as my quilting guide, but if you're just using a plain fabric, it's optional how you would like to quilt it. You can either draw on the individual lines if you're a beginner and you're not as confident sewing straight lines for the quilting, or you can use this accessory which comes with most sewing machines. It is a spacer bar, and I'll show you in a moment how to put this onto your machine. I did think this was an Allen key for years and didn't have a clue what it was, but yeah, it is a space bar and it is amazing to use when you're quilting plain material. So we're going to get started by marking out our fabric pieces. So my material is folded in half, so I'm just going to fold it right sides together, just because it's going to be a bit easier for me to see when I'm marking on with the tailor's chalk if I mark straight onto the white side instead. So we're going to lay our material flat, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get our device, whichever device it is that you're using, and then we're just going to place it on top of the material. We're going to get some tailor's chalk and we're just going to go around the edge of the device. And then we're going to do that 3 times. So again, move it up and then just continue. Okay, so once you've marked on your 3 panels, we're just going to use a ruler now just to straighten them out. And then with this 3rd panel, so with the last panel that you've done, this is going to be, so the bottom 2 are going to be where they fold over to hold the device, and then the 3rd panel is going to be the flap that goes over that we then tie. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure this panel So it's 24. So at around halfway, 12, I'm just going to make a little marking. And the same again on the other side. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to create a curve. So from the centre point, we're going to mark again around halfway. So as our centre point was 12, I'm going to mark 6 down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a curve from the halfway point up to this point that I've just made. So just to go over it again to make it clear, on the last panel, you're going to measure it and then you're going to find your halfway point. You're going to mark your halfway point on both sides, and then whatever measurement your halfway point was, so mine was 12 centimetres, you're then going to half that again, which is 6, and then you're just going to mark from the centre of the bottom panel, you're going to mark 6 centimetres in, and you're just going to make a little mark here, and then from the 2 middle points to the central point, you're just going to create a curve. And this is where our little flap's going to be to close the case. And then we're just going to go ahead and cut out what we've drawn onto the material now. And then we also need to make 2 little straps so we can close our little case. So I'm just going to make 2 rectangles that are going to be 30 centimetres by 6 centimetres. And what we're going to do now is we're going to cut out our wadding. So we need 2 layers of wadding. We need 1 for each panel, so we're going to quilt on a layer of wadding to each panel. So what we'll do is we'll double over the wadding, lay it down, and then we'll place the main fabric pieces on top. You can just use one of the fabric panels. And then we're just going to cut round, ready to cut a little excess around, because sometimes I feel like when you quilt it does pull in a little bit and you don't want to be left short at any of the edges. So when you trim round, if you just leave around 2 centimetres, and then at the end we can trim that off. So now what we're going to do is get our wadding piece and our main fabric piece. We're just going to lay it on top. And just pop a few pins in central just to hold it in place. And you can pop your device out of the way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow these lines on the stripes, and I'm going to do quite a wide quilt on these. But if you're not using striped material, then using your machine, if you've got plain fabric, you can either measure out your first line of 2 centimetres, or 3 or 4, or however wide you want your panels to be, and then you're just going to mark on right up the ruler. And then you're just going to go ahead, use your tailor's chalk and mark down all of your lines. That is if you're not very confident at quilting, and you do want to follow a line. But if not, you can use this, which I showed earlier, which does come with most machines, this accessory. And what you do is, I'll just zoom in. As you can see, just here on your machine, this little black bit here, it'll be similar on most machines. What you do is you get the accessory with the corner pointing down, as this is going to be your guide, and then through this little tag you're just going to push through the spacer bar, and then you're going to use your tape measure to just measure from the centre of the needle if you want 2 centimetre lines apart, or 3, or whatever number you choose, say for instance 2, you'd lay this centre to your needle and then just push the spacer bar to 2 centimetres, and then when you are putting your material through the machine, each line of sewing, previous line of sewing that you've done, will line up with this spacer bar, and then you'll just continue to do that right along, and you'll get perfect lines each time. So for the quilting, my machine settings are the tension is between 3 and 4, my needle placement is central, I use a stitch length of around 3 and the width around 3, and I do a straight stitch. So I'm going to go and quilt my pieces now, and then we'll come back afterwards. Okay, so once you've quilted your 2 panels, you should have something that looks like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off the excess wadding now, right around the edge on both panels. So now, once you've trimmed around both panels, what you're going to do is you're going to lay the panels right sides together, and you're just going to match them up. You can either use fabric clips or some pins. I'm just going to use some fabric clips. And then once you've secured in place with either your fabric clips or your pins, what we're going to do is we're going to sew right round the panel, but we're going to leave a gap. On this bottom straight edge, we're going to leave a gap that's about 10 to 15 centimetres long. I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm now just going to sew right round the edge, leaving that gap unsewn in the middle on the bottom edge. What we're going to do is we're just going to cut the corners off, but make sure you don't go into the seam. You're going to do that on both sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reach in and we're going to turn it inside out through this gap that you've left earlier. Put your hand in and just press out and seams into the curve. Down the edges and then just into them corners as well. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to close that seam up now. So we're just going to fold it in on itself like this. And we're just going to do an edge stitch along the edge to close that seam. Okay, so now you should have something that looks like this. So once you've got this, what we're going to do is we're just going to measure our device. So I'm just going to measure the width of the length of the laptop. So 21.5 centimetres. Then what I'm going to do on here is I'm just going to measure 21.5. I'm going to add a centimetre on. And then I'm just going to make a mark here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same the other side, mark up the same as what I've just done, 22.5. And then we're going to fold it where we've just done the markings. We're going to fold it up. using them markings as a guide. And then we're just gonna pop some fabric clips on. And using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, we're just gonna sew down both sides. And then we're just going to make these 2 straps by folding them in half lengthways, sewing along the edge with 1 centimetre and then pulling them through and closing up one end. I'm just going to trim off the excess seam allowance. Just be careful not to cut into the seam. And then using a safety pin or a loop turner, I'm going to use a safety pin today. We're going to turn them inside out, pop it in, back on itself, help that little first bit through, and then the rest should follow quite easily. Just going to roll the seam to the side and give it a nice press. Okay, so now we've got our 2 straps, and what I'm going to do is on one of the ends, I'm just going to push in the end by about 1 centimetre, and then we're just going to sew a little edge stitch just to finish that off, and we're going to do the same on the other side. Okay, so we're going to attach one of the straps to the bottom panel here, and we're just going to attach it, put a little stitch along the edge, and then we're going to do the same for the other tie. We're going to put it in the centre of the panel with the raw edge against the raw edge, and we're going to fold it over, leaving about 1 centimetre. And then again, we're just going to secure it with a straight stitch across the top. I'll just pop a pin in to hold it in place. And then this is our little pouch finished. And I also made a matching one in a slightly smaller size to fit in my iPad. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below.